Direction point! Direction point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.
Well, hi everybody. Welcome back to Doctor Who Literature, the podcast taking you through the world of the Doctor Who novelizations put out by Target Books from 1973 onward in publication order. We're a member of the Direction Point Doctor Who podcast network. My name is Jason, and I'm your host on this journey, this very long journey. And for the very first time, we are coming to you live. This is the first live face-to-face recording that I've done in the 18 months of this podcast. And joining me this week is...
Stacey Smith.
Stacey was my very first guest back in episode 5, and she is, of course, the very first guest that I have live face-to-face. Now, this is interesting because last time you were on, we were talking about which book?
Doctor Who and the Giant Robot.
And at the end of that recording, I said, what is the next book you want? And I read you out a bunch of choices, and you said...
The Enemy of the World.
And what we did not know was that based on my recording schedule, Enemy of the World was going to be released the Sunday of Gallifrey One in Los Angeles, where we are now, and that we were both going to be here.
It was meant to be, so clearly.
Because the last time that I saw you 3 years ago was literally upstairs from where we are now, in the lobby of this hotel, on the last day of the last pre-pandemic galley.
Yeah, the more things change, the more things stay the same.
You have changed a little bit in the last 3 years.
Yes, I have regenerated, as you can see.
Time has changed little for either of us.
Yeah.
You continue to roam the universe while I persist in my humble existence in this hotel. This is my 9th galley overall. This is the second one that I've been to since the pandemic. This is your first... I was going to say this is your first galley since 2020, but that is not entirely accurate, is it?
No, it's my first galley, but it's not my first time in the LAX Airport Marriott since COVID, because I had a 7-hour layover between flights to Australia and decided to make an impromptu visit to the hotel. I was the entirety of LobbyCon in 2021.
So you were sitting in the lobby having an animated conversation with yourself.
Yes. Well, actually, I did the really neat thing of checking out the women's bathroom so that I would know what the layout was. You have to know these things when you're a queen.
Yes, I should point out that we are sitting near the karaoke room, so you may hear karaoke spillover. Chris Chibnall was in the karaoke room about an hour ago. If he wanders by, we'll flag him on over for an impromptu interview, guerrilla style. Not that he would know this podcast exists. So... I vividly recall when Enemy of the World got recovered. It was 2013. You were in New York with Graham Burke, and you were coming to a Doctor Who New York fan club event. And we had just watched Enemy of the World on iTunes. It had just been released a couple of days before. And what was your initial reaction to seeing Enemy for the first time in 2013?
Oh, I absolutely loved it. I'd enjoyed the novelization. That was my major way in. But seeing it on TV, I was like, this is like white-hot performances from Patrick Troughton. This is like, there's Australian content. There's people I realized were attempting an Australian accent very, very badly, but they were doing it. There's, the Doctor and his long johns. There were so many things about it. The date is on a calendar that we see. The book says 2030, but, we'd all sort of assumed it was, either then or somewhere. And it's just right there, it's 2017. And we're like, oh yes, nothing to be...
We are sitting in front of my copy of the book right now. In the year 2030, only one man seems to know what action to take when the world is hit by a series of terrible natural disasters. 2030 makes sense for Ian Marter because it's 50 years from the time that he's writing. So he must have known that Enemy of the World was set 50 years from the time it was broadcast.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense in retrospect, but we missed it entirely.
Because the episodes spanned 2 years. It started in December 67, finishes in January 68. We learn the action of the book is set on New Year's Day. So he was writing to the time the TV serial was actually broadcast.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. So I remember talking to you in 2013, and this is, of course, 9.5 years ago now, and I mentioned that one of the bad guys had an Australian accent, and you said that the accent was so bad you didn't realize it was meant to be yours.
Exactly. Yes. I sort of feel like this is how you must feel hearing like Dick Van Dyke or something. Doing like the worst accents ever and things like that.
For me, it is the tour guide to the Empire State Building in The Chase.
Oh yes,
that is exactly what New Yorkers sound like. Now, Miranda Raisin's character in Daleks Take Manhattan, not so much.
Mm-hmm.
I will point out that Dick Van Dyke, age 97, was just a contestant on The Masked Singer, which is an American reality show, so he's still out there.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah.
But he's no longer attempting a Cockney accent, as far as I can tell. So when did you first encounter Enemy of the World? Was it as a book, or as an audio, or as a recon?
It was as a book, and I don't think I'd experienced any Second Doctor books before, so I actually thought the Second Doctor was the guy on the cover. I thought, because actually they described Salamander as having his hair slicked back, and I was like, well, the guy on the front cover has his hair slicked back. That must be the Doctor as Salamander. So I was convinced that this was the Second Doctor for quite some time. I was like, well, who else would they put on the cover? It's got to be the Doctor or Salamander, and I was pretty sure that the woman was Victoria. So
I was savvy enough to know that was not Patrick Troughton. I probably had seen 5 Doctors at that point, and I would have seen the illustrations inside the novelization of the Moon-based Doctor Who and the Cybermen, where you have the illustrations of Patrick Troughton. So I would have known that he resembled Moe from the Three Stooges, which is my frame of reference at age 11. And I would have known that wasn't Victoria. My guess was that was Colin and Mary, because they are standing at computer consoles in front of volcanoes. I figured these were the folks responsible for triggering the volcanoes. That was my guess. And then when I finally saw the surviving episode 3 on the Troughton earlier years tape in the 90s, that's Giles, Kent, and Astrid.
Yes.
So we were both spectacularly wrong as to who the cover illustration was.
I think you were a little bit closer than I was.
It's a great cover, though. You got the volcanoes in the background, moody color scheme. Just that these are not folks that you would recognize.
It's such an obscure choice to put them on there. Like why these two? Like it's and it's so photorealistic of them as well.
I think this was the era when JNT was already producer and he was vetoing any Doctor on the cover that was not the current Doctor of the moment.
That's right.
Which would have been Tom Baker going into Peter Davison when this book hits the streets. But taking 2 secondary characters who only appeared in the story possibly is going to confuse large fractions of the audience. So you would have read this when you were, probably not even a teen yet.
No, I think it was 1983, I think. I was, 9 years old or so.
83? I would have been 10 in 83.
Maybe
so
10 or 11,
I think you're a year ahead of me.
Year ahead of you, yes.
So this is a globe-hopping book. It is highly political. There's different characters in every chapter. How did you absorb this book in 1983? Did it make any sense to you? Was it one of your favorites, or did it sort of just, sail past you?
No, it became one of my favorites. So what happened was I was on vacation. My aunt had won a trip to a cottage in like the sort of far north of Australia, and so my family had all piled in the car, and we'd driven for like 12 hours or something, and we got to this cottage, and it was like really, really like not much. Like there was one door, and basically like 2 rooms or something. It was one giant bedroom. I remember my mum forgot to pack the sheets, so we had to go buy sheets. My sister was a baby, and so we went into town, and my parents said, "Oh, you can, if you go to the bookstore, if you see a book, you can buy a Doctor Who book." Well, they said you can buy a book, but of course I'm going to buy a Doctor Who book. And this was the only one I saw. And I said, "Oh, it's a Doctor Who book. Great." I would have bought something with Tom Baker on the cover if I found that, but I thought, okay, something is better than nothing. I basically got the chance to buy a book. And so it was my only reading for several days. But actually, the book almost killed me. I almost died reading The Enemy of the World.
Okay, that's a story that I cannot top. How did you almost die reading Enemy of the World?
So, it was Australia. And it's very appropriate because the book starts in Australia. And, I think it says the hot Australian summer as we start. And it was definitely the hot Australian summer when I was here. And I was absorbed in this book. And I think we pulled up in the car, and I got out, and I think I was reading in the car, and I got out and I was reading, and I'm walking towards the only entrance, and it was 4 steps up into the doorway, and the steps had no back on them. And so as I'm walking towards, just at the corner of my eye, I see some movement, and luckily my instincts kick in, and I leap backwards because it's a poisonous snake.
Ooh.
There's a deadly snake living under the house, and it's coming through the back of the steps.
While you're sitting there reading.
And I am absorbed in the book, yes, exactly. So I almost died to death that day. And it turned out that the only way in and out of the house was up these 4 steps. And so what you had to do is you had to take a little run up and leap up the 4 steps in. Now, at 10, 11 years old, that's fine for me. That wasn't quite so fine for my mother, who was carrying my baby sister at the time. She had to do that as well, because it's Australia and everything's going to kill you. And then my cousin came to join us because he was a bit older and was roaming around Australia. And he sat there very patiently for about 4 hours outside the steps, waiting for the snake to poke its head out, and then grabbed it by the neck and killed it, hung it on the fence, presumably as a warning to the other snakes that this house was protected.
If snakes can crane their necks to see the top of a fence.
Exactly, yes. Yes, it was a wire fence, like all fences in Australia.
I have also almost been killed by a Doctor Who novelization. It was an Ian Martin book, but not this one. When I had my collision with a train 10 years ago, I was in the middle of reading Ark in Space.
That's right. We talked about that previously, actually.
I was in the Part 4 material, and I was running across a plaza and over a train platform to catch my commuter train. And if I missed it, it's 20 minutes to the next one, I'll be late for work. So I was holding the Kindle with the PDF of Ark in Space in my hand when I had my collision. And when I came down, the Kindle had completely broken. It was frozen on that one page of Ark in Space.
Yeah, right.
So I guess Ian Martin books are not good for either one of us.
Well, he is renowned for the violence.
Yes, and we've both experienced that firsthand. So in this book, Griffin the chef has memories of his childhood on the old Kent Road. On television, he's from Woolloomooloo. What is Woolloomooloo?
So Woolloomooloo actually has the distinction of being, it's one of the first signs that you see when you leave the airport. So you land in Sydney and you come out and you see Woolloomooloo. It's spelled W-O-O-L-L-O-M-O-O-L-O-O. It is an amazing street sign.
You lost me several doubles ago.
Exactly, yes. and actually my girlfriend, my first girlfriend who was Canadian, when she and her family moved to Australia, they came out of the airport and they saw this sign and they said, turn around and go back to Canada. We can't be here.
So it is a real place.
It is a real place, yes. Yeah, so it's obviously named after like a local Aboriginal place, but it's just south of the airport. So, very minimal research of anyone visiting Australia would have immediately seen this sign.
So after you read the book in '83, you enjoyed it, even though it almost killed you. When did you encounter either the surviving audio or the telesnap recons?
Yeah, it must have been when they came out on VHS, I think. And of course, I think I only watched episode 3. I didn't watch any recons. I wasn't a big recon person, and so for me, the novelization was it. And episode 3, it's not that stellar. And you've got Dean's being guarded in a corridor and stuff like that. And so you got Griffin the comedy chef who's only in that episode, and you're kind of like, this is very weak stuff. And for me, actually, the imagination from the book was amazing, because actually not only did I read it on that holiday, I read it again and again and again, because I only had one Doctor Who book. So I was really absorbed in this thing, and so I feel like I knew the story of the Enemy of the World very, very well. So by the time it came out, got recovered and I watched it in 2013, I was intimately familiar with it. So, I was watching that like it was Lord of the Rings. Like I was nitpicking all the things that I knew to be true from the book that were not in the TV show.
See, I had the intermediate step. When my kid was born in 2010, I was off work for a month. So I was responsible for overnight feedings. And I was watching a lot of Patrick Troughton recons, and then I was typing up reviews and sending it to you for the ratings guide. So I watched The Enemy of the World. I think it was the Loose Cannon recon. If it wasn't Loose Cannon, it was whoever did them. So I watched it over 6 days, and I talked about how we don't know what the story looked like because we don't have any of the surviving visuals. I'm assuming it's meant to be a James Bond pastiche because Ian Martin in the novelization has a character's phone number changed to 007.
Yep.
And then when I saw the actual surviving episode 1 in 2013, I was completely blown to the back of the room because part 1 as a recon is okay, the dialogue is good, but you have no idea of the actual scope of these sets and the design and the helicopter and all the live action chases. And then in part 4, in the book, he appears to be entering a glass elevator. But on television, it's an actual full-sized rocket that folds out of the wall and he climbs into it sideways. I don't think any of us pictured that the TV show was quite that vivid, especially because the surviving episode is Dennis being guarded in a corridor and a chef talking about it's going to rain.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a funny story because I think it's it's in the middle of the monster season, and so you've got Yeti and Cybermen are everywhere, and there's seaweed creatures and foam and so on, and so you're expecting the monsters, right? And I think it was a deliberate inversion, and so Salamander gets in this elevator or the rocket, and he goes downstairs, and you think it's going to be giant crabs. I don't know.
The return of the macro.
Maybe it's going to be giant swans, given that he does say Mr. Swan when he gets there. But, it's going to be some creatures down there, and it turns out it's just ordinary humans. And that's quite shocking, actually. And I think we don't really appreciate that with the benefit of hindsight, which I think we all have come to it, like knowing this. But I think it must have been incredibly shocking for viewers at the time, because they really pull a fast one on us.
Yeah, now... televised season 5 goes from Tomb of the Cybermen to Wheel in Space. So this is the only story in that season that doesn't have any monsters. Now, production season 5 goes from Abominable Snowman up through the Mind Robbers. So production season 5 is not quite so monster heavy. Dominators has robots but no monsters. Mind Robber has robots but no monsters. Unless you count the Medusa and the stock footage of the unicorn.
I totally count them.
Yes. But... Not focusing on the lack of monsters. When I was on Rec Arts Doctor Who in the 90s, we had this ongoing debate, you and me and Graham Burke. Who was the best human villain of the Troughton era? It was Philip Madoc in the War Games, but then, in the middle of the 90s, while we're still on Rec Arts, the 6 episodes of The Invasion are released on VHS.
Yes.
With Nicholas Courtney doing that narration for parts 1 and part 4, which were missing. So that's when you realize that Kevin Stoney is the best villain of the Patrick Troughton era.
Yes.
But I've got another idea. Isn't it true that Patrick
Troughton, yes.
is the best villain of the Patrick Troughton era?
Yes, I think that's the amazing part of the... yeah, sorry, we're doing a podcast.
Oh, no, no worries, no worries.
Yeah.
We're known to each other.
Yeah. Where were we?
Patrick Troughton as the best.
Yes. Right.
That was Warren, I believe, right?
It was.
From Radio
yes.
Free Scaro.
Yes, that's right.
We're Facebook
You
friends.
should understand podcasts, yes.
Yes. Gave us a wide berth and gave us a bow and a scrape on his way out. So
yes, so the amazing part of watching it in 2013 was Patrick Troughton's performance is so incredible, like unbelievable intensity, that I literally forgot it was Patrick Troughton playing this role. Like, I'm like, oh wow, I'm just totally caught up in the antics of Salamander, and yet we cut back to the Doctor in a caravan every so often, but it's like, this is incredible, like it's Salamander all the way, and you're like, oh wait, that is Patrick Troughton. Like, he is unbelievably amazing. Like, and he's doing stuff he doesn't do with Doctor Who. With Doctor Who, I think he sort of, like, he's very good, but he has his shtick, and he just kind of does that, and suddenly he's really acting.
And as the Doctor, he doesn't say very much because he believed that silence and the recorder and comedic business were more memorable than long dialogue passages. Salamander is quite the opposite. It doesn't come across in the book, and I'll talk about this in the second half of the program. Salamander on TV is a non-stop font of words. So Salamander as characterized, very, very different. Characterized by his talking. And since we just saw Warren from Radio Free Scaro, I'm going to imitate a point that they did in their 2013 broadcast after they saw the recovered story. Patrick Troughton is playing 4 people in this episode.
Yeah. That's true.
He's the Doctor as the Doctor. He's Salamander as Salamander. He's the Doctor as Salamander. And he's Salamander as the Doctor. And this is another point from Radio Free Scaro. He's a 5th character. He's Salamander playing a good guy underground, because Salamander underground is very different from Salamander above ground.
Yes.
So it doesn't... Again, nothing on Kevin Stoney or Philip Madoc. Incredibly intense, amazing performances. Patrick Troughton is playing 4 or 5 people in one.
Yeah.
And he's doing it all in a 6-week stretch.
Yeah, it's a virtuoso performance. Yeah.
So then we come to the recovered episodes in 2013. We're all impressed. Now we go back to the book. Now that we've seen the surviving episodes, and Ian Marter would not have done that when he wrote this in 1980, how does the book measure up to what we've seen on screen?
I actually thought it held up really well. And actually, although I don't think he could have seen it, there's lots of places where it's like, yeah, this is accurate. This is exactly, what I was watching on screen. So yeah, I mean, I enjoyed this read just as much as I think I did when I was 11 years old. I zoomed through it. It was very, very pleasant, all over again. I think I did read it once in the 90s, and I did a whole Patrick Troughton novelization read through in the very early 90s, but I haven't looked at it since then.
When I was reading these books in the 80s, I was borrowing an idea from my friend Stephen, who was reading 1 episode part per day. Of course, for most of the Hartnell and Troughtons, we would have had no idea where the cliffhangers were. And I had I already owned the L'Officier program guide. I had gotten it into my head erroneously. This was a 5-part story.
Uh-huh.
So I was trying to read the book as a 5-parter instead of the 6-parter that it actually is. And I would never have been able to guess where any of the cliffhangers are. So there's one cliffhanger that ends a chapter in this book, but the rest of it, they all occur in the middle of scenes, and they're not very obvious.
Yeah. I tried to find them as well. I have them marked in my copy. I would put like a little slash in pencil where I thought the cliffhangers were. And it's funny realizing what I got right and what I got wrong in all my novelizations.
So now I'm curious, where did you think the cliffhangers were for Enemy of the World?
There's one where like Donald Bruce just walks in the door, and I think that's one of them.
That was episode 4.
Yes, that's right. yeah. I don't know if I had access to other information about this because I have them marked, and I think I got them roughly right. But I don't know where I would have found that out at the time because I definitely haven't marked the book up since the 80s.
I would have known where episode 3 was after I saw the surviving bit in the early 90s, so that's a bit of an abstract cliffhanger.
Yeah.
And I would never have guessed at all where episode 2 ended just from watching the reprise of episode 3. Mm-hmm. So that was a surprise to me. They were all surprises to me when I finally saw the recons in 2010.
Yeah. Yeah, and the fact that in the book they're mostly just, end of a sentence.
Right.
like if you're lucky you get a paragraph. It's I mean, in a way it makes it flow into one giant movie, but like you have chapters anyway, so why not use them? Yeah. Yeah,
and I like it when you can divide the number of cliffhangers by the number of chapters in the book. So Terrence Dix makes it very easy. He either does 12 or 14 chapters, so you always know his cliffhangers are going to end chapters 3, 6, and 9, or chapters 3, 6, 8, 10, 12.
Yes,
if
that's
it's
right.
a 6-part story. Ian Marter doesn't make it very easy on us at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I certainly found the ending is very abrupt, both in the book and on TV. And I remember actually being surprised it was so abrupt on TV when I saw it, because it just, Salamander, like, gets into the TARDIS, pretends to be the Doctor, and then the Doctor basically kicks him out into space, and that's it, it's done. And it's sort of like, right, into the web of fear. And you're kind of like, wait, sorry, what happened? It was so fast. And I think on TV I understand that they obviously it was a very difficult effect to produce. They had to cut carefully and quickly. But instead of reading the book, I kind of got to the end and went, wait, what? Like, that's it? So I actually picked up the Web of Fear novelization to see, does he pick this up at all? And basically, no.
No.
I mean, it's still, they start in the TARDIS, but like, it feels like there's a jolly conversation happening in the TARDIS at the beginning of the Web of Fear novelization, and it doesn't seem so jolly at the end of the Web of Fear. At the end of Enemy of the World.
Yeah, the Web of Fear novelization had come out 4 years before this, and that was a very heavily truncated novelization that is missing an awful lot of TV material. Same as this one. They're both heavily cut down. But yeah, the cliffhanger, because the books are coming out in reverse order, there is no cliffhanger between the two.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In fact, and I'll bring this up on the other half of the program, the only cliffhanger in the entire TV serial where any member of the TARDIS crew is in jeopardy is the end of episode 6.
Right. That's amazing.
Yeah. Episode 4, maybe because you think Donald Bruce is a bad guy, but he becomes an ally 5 minutes later.
That's
so
right,
it's not really a jeopardy cliffhanger with a point of a gun.
Mm-hmm.
So you have made some notes about the book. Anything else you want to tell us?
I think we've been through most of it. Oh, no. Yes, right. My one note was the Doctor spends quite some time waiting for evidence. Like, he's kind of hanging out with Giles and being like, yes, maybe Salamander's a bad guy, and it all looks maybe suspicious, but I really got to be sure. And so I think I made a note that he's doing this on page 69. He says, the Doctor's spending a long time waiting for evidence. And then I'm waiting for him to actually get the evidence, and he gets the evidence on page 106. It is very, very late into the book when he finally determines, yes, Salamander really is as bad as everyone is saying. And so it's quite an odd role for the Doctor, because he's just kind of very passive in this. And of course, we understand why, given that actor was also, otherwise engaged in this story. But I obviously wasn't thinking about that at the time when I was reading it as a kid, and I was just sort of like, right, the Doctor isn't really doing a whole lot, and then he sort of, runs it at the end and solves everything, and that's great.
This is being shot live to tape in 75 minutes a week, and he has time for one costume change per week, so he can be Salamander and the Doctor, but he can't go back and forth every 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. So let's just have you do a dramatic reading of the top paragraph on page... Of course, I'm giving you page 69.
Yeah. The Doctor jumped to his feet, his face filled with admiration. "Excellent work, my dear," he cried, eagerly stretching out his hands for the file. "At last. Evidence."
And then a few pages later, Faria is killed and the evidence is taken back by the Milton Johns character. So it is not, as you say, until page 106 that the Doctor actually gets the evidence in question. So you will do a dramatic reading from paragraphs 3 through 5 on page 106.
"Come and look at these statistics, Bruce," he eventually cried. "This is a real prize. Just look at these monthly provisions figures," the Doctor pointed out. "Enough for a community of at least 100 people. How many personnel are there in this place?"
Bruce considered for a moment. "I'd reckon around 50 all told, but many of them live outside the center." With a puzzled frown, Bruce looked more closely at the figures.
The Doctor flicked through the pages. "And these equipment orders," he mused, his hands trembling with excitement. "Sonar flex intensifiers, magnetic field filtering prisms. Nothing to do with any solar collecting systems I've ever come across, Bruce. But a very useful set of spares for some kind of apparatus designed to cause highly selective and localized Earth tremors and assorted geophysical firework displays."
"Earthquakes and volcanoes," Bruce murmured after a lengthy pause.
The Doctor nodded vigorously, thrusting the papers into Bruce's large, fleshy hands. "Hang on to these, Bruce. They are the best evidence we have so far," he said earnestly. "I am now going to get into the sanctum sanctorum," the Doctor announced, seizing the telephone.
And I'll point out that I was originally going to have you read 3 paragraphs, and then I realized, wait a minute, we're face to face, and there's 2 characters in the scene. I want to be Colin Douglas.
That was amazing.
Said no child ever. I want to be Colin Douglas.
It's good to have dreams.
So, speaking of dramatic reenactments, you know it is a tradition on the show for me to challenge the member of the panel to a game. I have 3 games on this show. We have 20 questions, we have Listener Limerick Challenge, and we have Guess That Cliffhanger. Now, I have a story picked out for 20 questions, but that would be boring. Since we're doing this face-to-face, we're going to play Guess That Cliffhanger. Ordinarily, what I do is I go to episodeguide.net, or whatever the website is, and I pick 3 random classic series cliffhangers, and then I play the audio, or I show the clip, and my guest has to guess. Since you and I are sitting in the basement level of the LAX Marriott, 30 feet down from the karaoke room, with curious passersby looking at us, I don't have access to episodeguide.net. I can't show you a clip. So what I'm going to do is I have in my head picked 3 cliffhangers that end in words. I made the mistake a couple of weeks ago on the show of showing somebody the cliffhanger to part 1 of The Deadly Assassin, because that's what came up in random order.
Right.
The problem is when you play the audio on the show to the cliffhanger of part 1 of Deadly Assassin, all it is
very
music.
difficult to figure
it's
out,
impossible
yes.
to guess.
Mhm.
So I have picked 3 cliffhangers that involve people talking. And since my acting abilities are limited, I'm going to give you basically the words, and you're going to have to guess the story and which episode part it concludes.
Okay.
So this will be your first guess. I may not be Albert Einstein, but you don't have to be a genius to figure out the off switch. You have escaped my slave, but you will obey me or die. And if we were watching the video, you would see Nicola Bryant, and you would see then Anthony Ainley against a green screen.
So that's Planet of Fire. I'm going to say episode 3.
And how did you deduce that?
Well, she's on the boat in episode 1. Yeah.
And why wouldn't it be 2?
I think she spends quite a while kind of slithering down the side of a volcano
Yes.
in episode 2. Yes.
And also, you are right that it is Planet of Fire. You are incorrect. It is not episode 3. It is part 3.
Part 3. Oh well, yes.
But I'll
you're
give you
right,
I'll give you both points. So that is 2 for 2.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and this is your next clue. The man's a murderer. Come on, Nissa. He means it. Together, one last hope. So if you were watching the video, that would be Sarah Sutton, Matthew Waterhouse, our friend Anthony Ainley again, and Tom Baker.
Right. So that's got to be Logopolis.
And which part would it be?
I think that's part. Oh, is that part 1?
Well, think about what's
I
happening
think-
in the scene.
Yeah. So one of the cliffhangers is the Doctor shrinking.
Right.
And that's I think a later one.
At last, Doctor, at last
yes,
I've cut you down to size. Well, that is not the cliffhanger line.
Yes. Maybe it's episode 2 then.
Episode 2 is the incredible shrinking TARDIS.
Right.
The scene is where Nyssa and Adric are being packed off into the TARDIS, and the Doctor and the Master stay behind to conspire.
Oh, that's right. They shake hands.
Yes.
That's the cliffhanger.
Now have I given you a clue?
So I'm paying no attention to the words when the Doctor is shaking hands with the Master. That's episode 3.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
See, if I were
because
showing...
Tom Baker really does that shaking hands without looking at him very, very well.
And if I were showing you the video, but since we're doing this on the fly in a hotel lobby, all I'm giving you are the words.
Yes.
All right, so now we're going to have to do one more. And this is one of my favorite cliffhangers of all time. And the Doctor is talking to a microphone. What is the capital of Alberta? How many beans make 5? Right, cut it open. If you were watching the video, you would probably know right away.
It's familiar.
It is John Pertwee. He's asking questions into a microphone. He's not getting answers. And he turns to somebody else and goes, right, cut it open.
It's not the Demons, episode 1, is it?
No, Demons episode 1 is
that's
where
when they do open the
barrow is open and the cold air comes out.
Yes. I can't think of what he's cutting open.
I'll give you a hint, because if you were watching the video, you would see it's a space capsule.
Oh, it's Ambassadors of Death.
Yes.
Yes. That's probably episode 1, I think. They come in pretty early, don't they? Yeah.
Episode 1 is Tautalion's gun.
Oh, right, okay. Must be episode 2 then.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to give you 5 out of 6 points altogether.
Sounds good.
I cannot forgive your thinking that they were still called episodes in the J&T.
Yeah. Okay, you got me there.
4 out of 6 is passing. You get 5 out of 6, so that is good.
Fantastic.
And we're doing this the hard way.
Yeah, we really are.
You're not getting any clues, just my bad acting.
Out of context acting.
Yes. Ordinarily, when I'm doing this over Zoom, it's a little bit easier. So how about we follow that up with 20 questions?
Sure.
All right. I have picked one episode somewhere between 1963 and 2021 or 2022. And you are going to have to guess through 20 yes or no questions which story I am.
So it's a single episode of a story?
It is one complete serial.
One complete serial.
So if, for example, it were a classic series, it could be a 4-parter or a 6-parter.
Right. Yep.
And if it's the new series, it would either be a 1-parter or a 2-parter, whatever it is. One story unit.
Okay.
You have 20 questions. Question 1.
Classic series?
It is. I am not the classic series. Question 2.
David Tennant?
I am not David Tennant. Question 3.
Peter Capaldi?
I am not Peter Capaldi. Question 4.
Matt Smith?
I am not Matt Smith. Question 5.
Jodie Whittaker?
I am Jodie Whittaker. Well, no, I am not Jodie Whittaker. I'm Jason Miller. But Jodie is here. She is somewhere in this hotel. We're all going to see her tomorrow. She is one of the big headliners, along with Chris Chibnall. The fact that I picked a Jodie Whittaker story is completely random. I just happened to get a Jodie story while we're at a con with Jodie.
Is Ryan a companion?
So this is question 6. Yes, Ryan is a companion in this story. Question 7. That narrows it down to Series 11 or Series 12.
Yes. Is it Series 12?
It is Series 12. You're now on question 8. And now you're just about guaranteed to win because there are fewer stories to pick than questions you have left.
Is it in the first half of Season 12?
Yes, it is in the first half of Season 12. Question 9.
Does it have Jadun in it?
It does not have Jadun in it. Question. Now, ordinarily, my guests have their phones out or in front of an episode guide. You were doing this on the fly. This is completely commando style.
Yes.
Question 10.
Is the Master in it?
The Master is not in it. Question 11.
Right. So now I've got to remember my Season 12 ones.
It's tough sledding.
Yeah.
Luckily, Chris Chibnall did not walk by as I said that.
That's right. Yes, I do love that season. Right. Yep. there's Spyfall, and it's not that one. And then there's some episodes, and then there's Return of the Jadoon.
It would not be Spyfall, which has the Master in it, and it would not be...
Yes, it's one of the three in the middle, then.
Right, it would not be Ascension of the Cybermen or
yeah, because they're too late. Yep.
Yes.
Yes. Is it Nikola Tesla?
You are on the right track, but no, it is not Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror. I think
Yeah.
you're on question 13 now. You're going to have to be some fan to remember every episode of Series 12, which is not the most memorable series. There are some very good episodes in it.
It's a very good episode. When I rewatch it, I usually jump straight from Spyfall to Dune, and then I watch the back half of it. What else is in there?
Well, since you've narrowed it down to 3 or 4 stories, I'll give you a hint. The plot of the episode is relevant to your day job.
Oh, is it Praxius?
It is Praxius.
It is Praxius.
The
there
plague
we go.
story.
Yes, fantastic.
Because the last time that we were here, it's February 2020, and you and me and our friends Nicole and Bill are standing in the lobby talking about, is COVID going to kill us? And you said, no, it is not even one of the 10 deadliest diseases of all time, and you pulled out of your phone a list. And you made us guess.
I stand by that. Yes, it is not one of the 10 deadliest diseases of all time. It is number 11.
And
I say this because I've written a book on this, which I am just at this very moment doing the final edits of. And yes, it is the 11th worst disease we have ever encountered.
there is a state somewhere out west in the United States. It is a red state that has just proposed a law in the state legislature that would make it a misdemeanor for anybody to administer an mRNA vaccine. So now science is illegal in at least one of the 50 states, and you know it's going to spread to other red states. So COVID still has time to get to number 9 because this country is becoming so relentlessly anti-science.
Yes, yeah. I mean, this is not new, actually. So in writing the history of the top 10 diseases of all time, this kind of story is everywhere, right, through history. I think we lived in an unusual period of time from about the 1940s to about the, early 2010s. And we are back to where we always were, right? There were some, amazing advances happening on the one hand, but there is a lot of ignorance and superstition and stuff happening. And I don't know why we're returning to this time, but we clearly are. And so, I think the 90s was such an aberration of, that was really where we all peaked, really.
We grew up in the vaccine age. For us, vaccines are the most normal thing in the world, and now they are literally illegal in parts of this country. So here at Galley, you and I tomorrow are on a panel talking about the 8th Doctor adventures. And you are also working on a book about the EDAs.
I am. I'm rereading all the EDAs as we speak.
What are you up to?
I've just finished The Adventuress of Henrietta Street. I was writing the guide on the plane.
How does that hold up? I'm very curious. How does that hold up?
Actually, it holds up very well. I was quite impressed. I was very absorbed by this, although I will say some of it has aged very badly. The Doctor is engaged to a 13-year-old sex worker who he intends to marry and explicitly intends to have sex with when they get married. The only reason he does not marry this 13-year-old child is because it turns out that she was not a virgin after all, and so instead he marries a prostitute who's in her early 20s.
I had managed to put all of that out of my head.
The book is so clearly designed to shock, right? And it's, the Doctor loses his heart, he grows a beard, he lives in a brothel for a year. Like, it's really pushing the envelope of Doctor Who. And I'm like, cool, I'm fine with all this stuff. I'm just not fine with him basically planning to have sex with a minor. I feel like this is where I think we should have reached our limit.
This was, of course, the amnesiac post-Ancestor Cell Doctor who didn't know who he was. I will say that I recently reread Camera Obscura for another podcast, and that episode is probably coming out next month. Ian Martin's We're All Stories in the End. He's going through the EDAs and other of the 1990s books. So I picked Camera Obscura. I read that for the first time in literally 20 years. I was amazed about how well it held up, because when I was reading that Sabbath arc in the wild in 2002 and 3, I often got confused as to what was going on book to book, and I didn't really have a good idea of what the story arc was. Camera Obscura is so well told that it tells you exactly what's going on at all times.
It's a real highlight of the range. And yes, I haven't got around to rereading that one, but I've read it. Well, I've reread it before, but I haven't read it in the current run. But I just read City of the Dead, and oh my god, Lloyd Rose's prose is incredible. Like, it just grabs you, and it does incredible stuff. Yeah.
She also had written an episode for one of my all-time favorite American TV series, Homicide: Life on the Streets. So she came to Doctor Who with bona fides already.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you this as a trivia question. Do not give the answer. The answer will occur next month on We're All Stories in the End. The Doctor and Fitz and Angie rent rooms in London while they are living there, and the story takes place over the course of a month or two as they're trying to solve this mystery and chase down the titular camera obscura, and I won't spoil what that is either. They're living in what I believe is a very specific landmark London address. Did you get the sense of what that address was when you read the book?
I don't think I did, or at least it hasn't stuck in my memory if it did. So I'm going to say no.
Well,
I'm going to make a guess as to what it is based on your description.
Tell me the guess after we stop recording.
I will do that,
but
yes.
Everyone tune in next month. I believe it's the March episode of We're All Stories in the End. And I'll be the guest, and I will be giving the answer in that episode.
Amazing.
Or what I think the answer is. So I am curious now to read the rest of the books in the cycle after Camera Obscura, because I suspect that it will make a lot more sense to me now than it did in 2002. So the EDAs were very inventive, and a lot of their changes to the mythos end up getting incorporated into the new series, and I imagine that'll be the point of your Bookworm book.
Yes. We are explicitly tracking all the ways in which the things that you see in the books turn up in the show. Now, they don't necessarily directly turn up because of the books. It might just be that people are thinking along the same lines. There's only so many stories in the end. But there's clearly explicitly some things that happen. I mean, we know that Russell T Davies was, reading all the new adventures, for instance. They basically invent Torchwood in All-Consuming Fire. It's right there on the page. And so, like that probably wasn't like he went, oh, yes, I remember that in Andy Lane's book. He probably just sort of had an idea, maybe didn't know where it came from. Like, this happens all the time. So, yes, I mean, there's all kinds of fun stuff. In the Adventures of Henrietta Street, which I just read, they spend the whole book planning this wedding between the Doctor and what turns out to be Scarlet. And the TARDIS is described as it's exactly what you need for a wedding. It's something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue.
Oh, wow.
That's exactly what happens in the Big Bang. That's what restores the universe. Exactly. Yes.
So here's another trivia question. Don't give me the answer. Or give me the answer if you think you know it. There is a Doctor Who story where the Doctor becomes war president of the planet Gallifrey, and leads the Time Lords with battle TARDISes in a time war against the Daleks. He despairs of how badly the war is going, and he comes up with a scheme that will destroy everything. But a character called The Moment shows up and stops him from destroying everything and sets things to rights. Which Doctor Who story am I?
It's not Warmonger, is it?
It is not Warmonger, because your review of Warmonger on the ratings guide, I am still laughing out. I still cannot control myself because the bad guy in Warmonger is named Rombusi.
Yeah.
And your reaction to that, in a review written under your birth name, is an anagram, which is the funniest thing I've ever read. So stop what you're doing, read the review of Warmonger on the ratings guide, and you will see what Stacey thought of Warmonger.
Yes.
Obviously, I'm describing the plot of Day of the Doctor. But it is not only the plot of Day of the Doctor, it is also the plot of a past Doctor adventure that came out at the same time as the EDAs. And if the author was still alive, he would probably have a pretty good copyright claim. Answers on a postcard. Maybe I'll reveal next week.
I can't wait.
All right. Well, Stacey, we have a very busy con to get to, and tomorrow, after we do our 8th Doctor panel, you are giving a academic lecture at a sci-fi con. What's that about?
I am, yes. So it's basically Doctor Who and the Epidemics of Death, but it's specifically Doctor Who and the Silurians. So I talk about pandemics in Doctor Who, but I talk about the major pandemic in Doctor Who, which is Doctor Who and the Silurians. So this is also the subject of a Black Archive that I wrote some years ago, which came out in January 2020, talking all about pandemics.
Which I bought in February 2020 and read in February 2020.
Yep, so you were way informed before COVID arrived.
And it was also the subject of our Trap 1 episode.
Yes, exactly.
So if you go into the Trap 1 archives, I interviewed Stacey about... I thought that was your first interview as Stacey, if memory serves me right.
It might well have been, yes.
Yes, that was Black Archives 39, Doctor Who and the Silurians. Right. Yes. So I'm looking forward to your speech tomorrow. Now, do you have the animated title, Doctor Who and the Epidemics of Death, Ambassadors of Death style? With the words of death racing towards the camera?
I wish I was that skilled at animated things.
All right, Stacey, great seeing you again for the first time in 3 years. Hope to see a lot more of you this con.
Can't wait.
And we'll be back after the break.
They all say, who is Doctor Who?
Do you collect Doctor Who? Do you have Doctor Who items and you don't know that you collect Doctor Who? For all things in the Doctor Who collecting world, tune in to the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast, a Direction Point Network podcast. I am Larry Van Mersbergen, your host, and I have been collecting Doctor Who for 41 years. We have popular features like collection protection and the most outrageous offer, anywhere you get your podcasts. You're listening to Doctor Who Literature, and whatever you do, keep turning the pages.
So I'm here in the dealer's room with Dale Santos, who's been on the show before. Dale, it's great to see you again, my man.
Hey, Jason. Always a pleasure.
And this year I'm upgrading my old targets. I'm getting a first edition Claws of Axos, the original cover, because I have the 80s reprint. Who is the cover artist on this?
That would have been a personal friend of mine named Christos Okilios, who just passed away last year.
Yes.
Very first artist to do the covers. He did about 28 of the covers for the Target line of books.
And this is one of the best.
Oh, I think it's splendid, isn't it? I mean, it just, Claws of Axos, it's a beautiful rendition. He always really enjoyed the fact that as a last minute thing, he added the rays that are coming out of the eyes of the golden axon.
Oh, wow, look at that.
He didn't know if it was going to work, but it really pops. I wish I had the original artwork that I'm lucky enough to own to show you in person, because it really pops when you see it.
It absolutely works. And I'm looking over there. You have something I've never seen before. You have a poster-sized Pinnacle cover.
That was a promotional poster that should have went to the shops. It's the artist is David Mann. He was famous for doing a lot of motorcycle-inspired artwork for the magazine called Easy Rider. He also was known to later on in life as doing wonderful renditions of Native Americans.
Wow.
But nevertheless, David Mann did the 10 Pinnacle books, and getting back to the poster, it just came to light, and that would have just went to the shops, so it was never something that the fans could have gotten, I guess, unless you went in and hit somebody up, but they never put them out. So I was lucky enough to find some of them. They all came rolled. They were from an estate sale from the Bay Area.
Oh, wow.
So I really tickled pink to be able to bring something like that to Gallifrey One to possibly sell.
That looks as if it is brand new. I don't see a wrinkle or a crease on it.
No, and I mean, it's amazing. They were never put out. These, I don't know what happened. Maybe they weren't moving them enough. Granted, they had, as you and I both know, they had many different editions of them, of the Pinnacle books.
And every edition had a different color logo.
It did indeed. And of course, you know, what's wonderful about it is that on top of it, they have that wonderful Harlan Ellison blurb about Doctor Who, which, you know, is kind of in the introduction. When you read the Pinnacle books, you see that.
Yes.
So just really happy to be able to offer that at Gallifrey One, and also I kept a couple for myself because I am still, as Jason knows, I still collect. I'm just not always flogging stuff. I do still collect.
Now that is the Day of the Daleks poster. Would you know if they did posters featuring the other covers? Because I see Genesis of the Daleks on there, I see Doomsday Weapon on there,
Well,
I see Seeds of Doom on there.
To the best of my knowledge, Jason, that is the only poster that was ever done for the books. There is another variant, and there's maybe 2 or 3 that are known to exist. It's a folded folder, and it kind of, you open it up, it says, first there was Star Trek, and then I think you open it up again, and then it says, then there was Star Wars, and now there was Doctor Who. A few of those folded posters, they're the same exact size, because I'm fortunate enough to own one of those, have been found, and they always seem to be found overseas.
Huh.
So I almost kind of, in my mind, I kind of have a feeling that maybe they were never put out to shops here. They were more of what went out to the shops overseas, which makes sense to me because these folded posters, even back then, it would have been a little pricey to send a folded poster as opposed to a flat poster.
Of course.
That's just all pure conjecture on my part. But yeah, to answer your question, no, that would be the only one I've ever seen. There's also a mini poster that's quite rare. Same artwork, and granted, that was the first book in the series.
Yes.
So once again, that might be why they were inspired to use that for the artwork.
And that would date back to 1979.
That would
probably
be a 79 piece right there. If you look at the other 3 books that are on the cover, they're all the first editions also. You can kind of tell by the colors. Although it can get very tough with these Pinnacle books because, as you're aware as I am, that sometimes the different editions, the color is just very subtle. It'll be a different green coloration, and if you don't have good eyes or you're not in good light, you might think it's the same book, but you'd have to, look in and find out.
And I have terrible eyes. That is, in fact, Dinosaur Invasion, not Seeds of Doom in the middle.
Indeed.
Because the big picture is Day of the Daleks, and there's the inset on the bottom left with the 3 other covers, and that is not Seeds of Doom. That is, in fact, Dinosaur Invasion.
Right, that is indeed. I like the fact that in the bottom right-hand corner, so you can't really pick it up right now, but it says David Mann, which I think is really cool.
Oh, that is very cool.
They paid respect to him at the time he did that. Lots of times you'll see a poster and they're not from that era and they're not signed by the artist, but...
That is a beautiful find. It's a wonderful thing you have here, Dale.
No, thank you, Jason. It's a pleasure to share it with you and with anybody that's listening.
And I hope to see you again next year, of course.
I'll be here, my friend. Thank you.
I hope you've enjoyed this week's coverage of the first 2 days of the Gallifrey One convention in Los Angeles, held February 16th through 18th, 2023. Jodie Whittaker is here. Chris Chibnall is here. I've met Jodie very briefly at a guest reception. She is exactly like her doctor, super bubbly, super enthusiastic, really a delight to speak to. I have not yet had the chance to talk to Chris Chibnall face-to-face, but I have attended a couple of panels that he's been on, and he's just being greeted very warmly and positively, which is a wonderful thing to see after some of the relentlessly negative discussion of his era on various corners of the internet. He's getting a very good reception here, and so is Jodie. But it's not just them. There are tons of new series and classic series guests here, tons of Big Finish guests. I'm not going to mention everybody, but I am hoping to do a Gallifrey-specific wrap-up episode on Trap One with a couple of other podcasters that I've met here. There was a podcasters meetup today in one of the smaller panel rooms in the hotel. Met a lot of other really cool people who do really interesting Doctor Who and other sci-fi/genre podcasts. Hopefully some of those people will be appearing on the show in the future. I've also recorded a few interviews at Galley for future episodes. Longtime friends of the program and frequent guests, Dave Barsky and Bill Evenson, sat down with me today. I'll be releasing that in the next week or so. Had a really, really interesting conversation with a man named Jason Davis, who is an expert on all things Harlan Ellison. He has a very interesting story to tell about the Harlan Ellison introduction to the Pinnacle reprints of the Target books, which we've talked about on this show in the past. Look for that conversation in an episode in a couple of weeks. You will definitely be surprised and delighted by what you hear. Coming up next is my breakdown of the novelization of Enemy of the World. That is the only bit of this episode that was not recorded at Gallifrey One in the hotel. I recorded that earlier in the week, back when I was still in New York. But again, plenty of content generated here at Galley One. I will be saving that for the next several episodes, in addition to what you've already heard today. There are many great conventions in the U.S. I go to LI Who every year. I've heard great things about Chicago TARDIS, although I've never been. But Gallifrey One, which has 5 tracks of programming every hour during the day and several events at night, is just the great granddaddy of them all. I spoke on 2 panels on the Friday, a panel about the 8th Doctor Adventures that was moderated by a friend of the program and frequent guest Stacey Smith, and I also was in on a panel talking about toxicity in fandom on Friday night. Met some very interesting people, some very interesting conversations were had. If you ever have the chance to come out to Los Angeles to Gallifrey One, do yourself a favor and go. Great place to meet Doctor Who friends, old and new. Great place to interact with the cast and production crew and Big Finish artists and writers. Just a wonderful time, and I want to thank you all for listening to this episode, most of which was recorded live at Gallifrey One. And there is definitely more Galley-related content to come on this show over the next several weeks. Doctor Who and the Enemy of the World. Written by Ian Marter. Televised as The Enemy of the World. Teleplay by David Whittaker. Televised in December 1967 and January 1968. Published in April 1981. Cover artist Bill Donohoe. In the year 2030, only one man seems to know what action to take when the world is hit by a series of terrible natural disasters. Salamander's success in handling these monumental problems has brought him enormous power. From the moment the Doctor, Jamie, and Victoria land on an Australian beach, they are caught up in a struggle for world domination, a struggle in which the Doctor's startling resemblance to Salamander plays a vital role. The story is that this novelization was supposed to have been written by episode author David Whittaker. Whittaker had, if you'll recall back to episodes 1 and 3 of this podcast, done a stupendous job adapting two of the first three novelizations, the Frederick Muller books, which in 1973 became the first three official Target books. Unfortunately, Whittaker died in February 1980, just 51 years old, which seemed old to me when I first learned this information in the 1980s, but which seems frighteningly young now, as I'm only a little more than 18 months away from that age. Regardless of the circumstances, Ian Marter, who stepped into the breach, wastes no time in telling a memorable tale. This is a short book, 121 pages of text, which is about average length for the Target line, much shorter than the earlier Whittaker books, but longer than many of Terrence's most recent efforts. We'll find out that we're missing a lot of TV material as we go, but Marter, perhaps more so than any other Target author, writes for the five senses, and you get an understanding of the sweltering Australian summer heat and an inkling of the deadly trouble awaiting our heroes just from the very first paragraph on page 7. The hot January sun beat out of the cloudless blue sky, and a warm northeast wind blew the coral sea into a roaring froth over the Great Barrier Reef. The Australian summer was at its height. Between the tangle of thick vegetation covering the dunes and the crashing cascades of breaking waves, the broad beach of fine white sand wobbled in the relentless heat. There was no sign of life, except for something moving swiftly over the clear water about 2 kilometers from the shore, enveloped in a curtain of shimmering spray. On land, the only movement was the ceaseless rustling of dense tropical foliage and the zigzagging swarms of huge sandflies buzzing angrily over the sparkling sand in search of prey. Marter was working from an earlier draft of the script, so the Doctor does not do a full-body belly flop into the waves, a location choice by the superb physical comedian that was Patrick Troughton, but instead merely dances a jig in the surf. The three men in the hovercraft are named Rod, Tony, and Tibor, not Rod, Anton, and Curly, as on TV. No, not Curly from the Three Stooges, though Patrick Troughton does have a faint resemblance to Mo Howard, come to think of it. Perhaps the novelization is one reason why the recovery and 2013 release of the TV episodes caught fandom with such pleasant surprise. Chapter 1 zips by in a rapid blur. It doesn't really give much of a sense of the James Bondian scope brought to the material by rookie director Barry Letts. Apart from the surviving telesnaps, we didn't intuit, even from the available reconstructions, just how much of the budget money is visible on screen in Episode 1. And which explains why the surviving Episode 3 is the most visually cramped of the story, set mostly in kitchens and corridors. But Marter, while he races through the action, does have time, such as on page 17, to expertly catch Troughton's physicality. The Doctor ruffled his hair, examined his fingernails, whistled a few bars of a catchy tune under his breath, raised his eyebrows, and clicked his teeth. Then he looked at Astrid, and a strange expression came into his eyes. On the next page, one of Giles Kent's hired thugs has tears in his eyes after he accidentally shoots his comrade to death. And the last paragraph of the chapter does give a hint of Letts' directorial prowess, at least. Page 18. Suddenly there was a massive explosion, and a vivid orange flash lit up the trees. The blazing wreckage of the helicopter spiraled out of the sky and smashed into the garden below the terrace, followed by a rain of twisted, flaring metal fragments. A huge pall of thick rubbery smoke belched into the air and hung there like a giant black finger, pointing to disaster. Of course, a ton of dialogue, good dialogue, is missing. Compare the very truncated dialogue on pages 16 and 17 with this audio excerpt from episode 1.
Who are you?
You mean you don't know?
No, why should I?
Well, you went to such a great deal of trouble to save us. Ah, here we are. Thank you, Jamie.
Do you know how to use those things?
Oh, don't worry, the doctor will fix you up just fine.
Oh, you're a doctor?
Well, not of any medical significance.
Doctor of law? Philosophy?
Which law? Whose philosophies, eh?
Oh, I see. You're determined to be mysterious. Doctor of science?
Septic spray, that should be all right.
A doctor of divinity, then.
You'll run out of doctors in a minute. Ah, you haven't told us your name yet.
Astrid Ferrier.
Ah, Miss Ferrier, this is Victoria, and this is Jamie. Well, now, this won't take a minute. Just want to clean it off. Be as gentle as I can. There they are. Who are these men? Why are they so determined to kill us?
Kill you. They hate you.
Me? I'm the nicest possible person.
Oh, at least I should say they hate the person that they think you are. Passionately and completely.
Can't we tell them they made a mistake?
There wouldn't be time.
They seem remarkably dedicated.
They are.
There. Tell me, Miss Ferrier, do you hate me?
Far from it. To me, you're the most wonderful and marvelous man that's ever dropped out of the skies.
Chapter 2 also loses a lot of dialogue, a lot of Kent trying to persuade the Doctor to impersonate Salamander, and also the plot business about Kent himself summoning Donald Bruce as a means of tricking the Doctor into agreeing right there on the spot. Interestingly, though, the litany of men murdered by Salamander is longer in the book, and includes Astrid Ferrier's father. That's a detail that would have improved the already terrific TV serial, as it would have given more on-screen motivation for Mary Peach's character. Something Martyr does a lot of, in addition to writing for the Five Senses, is to characterize villains by their physical attributes. This is a slippery slope on which to tread. One of Salamander's thugs has a thin lip. Salamander has a rather long nose. Bennick, Salamander's deputy, on page 28 has, quote, a thin body and a face like the front of a skull. Short black hair straggles across his forehead in a jagged fringe, and his large red ears stick out slightly. Huge eyes burn in deep sockets, and his small mouth is drawn tightly over the teeth, we're told. Later on, Federin, the terminally nervous deputy to George Provide's character, is introduced via his clammy hands. Jamie and Victoria's contributions to the episode 2 material are almost entirely jettisoned from the book. Continuity references to the two previous serials are also gone. The on ice pun and the mention of the ionizer from the Ice Warriors removed from the episode 1 material, and the disused Yeti gag, calling back to the abominable snowmen, is taken out of the episode 2 material. Also missing is character-based flavor, with us losing the reference to Victoria as Jamie's girlfriend, and Faria referring to Salamander via the Spanish word for sorcerer. Martyr also doesn't pay much heed to the TV cliffhangers, which are an odd duck anyway, let's be honest. None of the first 5 cliffhangers feature the TARDIS crew in direct peril, and many of them are abstract moments. In fact, the only TV cliffhanger to put the regulars in jeopardy is the episode 6 cliffhanger, which leads into the Web of Fear, the next story. But that cliffhanger moment, as we'll see, is not in the book, with Web of Fear, the novelization, having already been out for years at this point. At least the episode 2 cliffhanger ends chapter 3, a courtesy not afforded any other cliffhanger. I'll read you the episode 2 cliffhanger material. Listen to how Martyr works those 5 senses into the moment, and watch for some appealing additions of alliteration to the action. Pages 43 and 44. A third time the terrace vibrated violently. LOL, try saying that 5 times fast. A third time the terrace vibrated violently. A strange burning smell was beginning to drift over the palace, and everyone turned to watch the eerie glow over the mountains, intensifying steadily. Danish was breathing heavily, with a painful wheezing and choking sound. "I do not know how you have done this terrible crime to innocent people," he whispered hoarsely. but I am convinced that it is for your own ends, and I shall demand—" Salamander cut short Denish's outburst. Wrenching himself free, he turned to Donald Bruce. "Arrest this man," he ordered. There was a stunned silence, broken only by the distant thunder of the volcanic eruptions and the rattling of the salon windows. Donald Bruce shook his head and stared sullenly at his feet. "What is the charge, sir?" he asked reluctantly. The whites of Salamander's eyes flashed menacingly. "Criminal incompetence, slander, and treason," he snapped. Alexander Denish gazes around him as if he were dreaming. "This is an outrage. The charges are absurd." He started laughing, as if the whole thing were a practical joke. "Federin, what is all this nonsense?" he cried. His deputy looked at the ground and said nothing. Salamander spoke in a quietly chilling voice. "My dear Denish, at your trial, Senor Federin will be the chief witness for the prosecution." Jamie may have gotten short shrift on TV dialogue, but on page 46 in the book he gets a stand-up-and-cheer moment with a bit of, quote, devastating impudence that leaves Donald Bruce, quote, gaping in silent and impotent rage. Speaking of short shrift, it was a known fact that Patrick Troughton liked to minimize his TV dialogue and replace long, scripted speeches with bits of silent action whenever he could. But as Salamander, Troughton, who holds high claim, right up there with Kevin Stoney and Philip Madoc, as being one of the best human villains of the Troughton era, is a fount of verbal delight on TV. In the book, you'll see he has much fewer words. Compare this clip from episode 3.
You've done very well so far, Federin.
It's nothing but a blackmail.
Blackmail? What have I threatened you with? Nothing.
No, but you would if I refused to.
Federin, I keep on telling you. This is just a form of comprehensive insurance, huh? It's nothing for you to worry about. Oh, my dear man, I've done nothing but praise you ever since we first met. I've said you should be European controller. I've said I would support you.
You found out things about me, lies that would damage me.
On the contrary, I'm doing you a good turn. I'm actually suppressing facts about you.
Lies, I tell you.
Lies. Truth. Who knows? But we wouldn't like to put him to the test, would we, huh? There.
What's this?
Used in the right way, at the right time, it can dictate your own future and the future of Alexander Denish.
Poison?
Speaking of truncated dialogue, Salamander's personal chef, Griffin, is tremendously funny on TV, but Martyr doesn't have either the time or the inclination to include this. So Griffin gets just one paragraph of dialogue in Chapter 4, and that's pretty much it. I won't play the TV scene, but it is terrific. Give it a watch. Well, after listening to this episode, of course. A few other scenes full of tertiary characters talking to each other are also expunged, as is the business with Alexander Denish being guarded in the corridor due to lack of budget for a prison cell set. Because it is easier to guard him there. Reading Chapter 4 is a bit heartbreaking, actually, as the chapter title, Too Many Cooks, refers to a memorable encounter between Griffin and Jamie that's not in the book at all. Also missing, the flirtatious guard Janos, who swings and misses at getting a date with Astrid Ferrier, and some of Carmen Munro's sharper dialogue as Faria. We also lose the clever bit where Salamander pretends to get the idea of installing Federin as European controller from Donald Bruce. But the scene where Federin loses his nerve over poisoning Salamander is given much more space in a very tense passage on page 53. With violently trembling fingers, he opened it and stared at the pale green crystals for a moment. Then he lifted the lid of the soup tureen and held the box over the steaming liquid. Immediately his spectacles misted over. Dropping the lid with an echoing clatter, he whipped them off and peered at the poisoned crystals, shaking the box slightly. The crystals seemed to have got stuck together in a mass. With a whimper of frustration, Federin shook the box, and the congealed green substance fell out onto the tray, splitting into several smaller lumps. Just then a door slammed loudly nearby. Uttering strangled little cries of terror, like a trapped child, Federin hastily tried to pick up the solidified lumps and put them back in the box, while peering blindly around him in the semi-darkness. Implied on TV, but terrifically spine-tingling in print. Almost makes up for all the missing stuff. Almost. Federer's death in the book is also, as we've come to expect from Ian Marter, much more graphic, as his corpse topples from the chair and drags the chair down on top of it. But gone as well is Salamander's chilling Alaskan wine reference. Chapter 5 sees a brief return for Griffin, but loses the reference to him growing up in Woolloomooloo. Dennis gets a much more graphic Ian Marter-esque death scene on page 59, as well as some dying words, with blood frothing from his mouth and a bright red stain spreading rapidly over the back of his tunic. Like a vault. In all, Episode 3 takes up barely 17 pages of text, and we lose Salamander's fine line to Jamie. Ingenuity requires a constant stream of new ideas. Yours seem to have dried up. Let's talk about Carmen Munro. Gives a terrific performance. Very rare to see a woman of color acting in a prominent role in 1960s Doctor Who. Or 1970s Doctor Who, for that matter. Munro is a fiery and memorable small role across episodes 2 through 4. I think Marter uses the expression, quote, black girl, a lot more than is acceptable today, but considering this book came out in 1981, and considering how some other contemporary Target books used words denoting ethnicity, I think Marter was being as progressive as the common language of the era would allow. Faria is described as lithe, and on pages 68 and 72 alike, cat-like. The start of her prolonged death scene, bottom of page 72, top of page 73, is quite cruel. Vividly so, however. Page 72. A series of bright red holes exploded across the back of her white tunic, and she was hurled against the wall. A security guard ran up and stood over her writhing body with his pistol leveled. I think this is perhaps a little too much. Violence against female characters really should be a no-no, but considering the graphic content of the rest of the book, it just about fits in. Perhaps more cruel than is necessary, but the bright red holes exploding is an image I've never forgotten in the decades since I first read this book, and I was a bit surprised when I finally got to see the recovered episode 4 that Barry Letts didn't quite stage it that gruesomely. Faria finally breathes her last words on page 74, although Bennick in the book fires a bullet near her corpse for emphasis immediately afterward. Like a vault. Several other minor changes between episode 4 on TV and the corresponding material in the book. Nothing as earth-shattering as the volcanoes that Salamander engineered in Hungary, of course. In the book, Kent knows what crimes Faria committed before being blackmailed into working for Salamander. It's the Doctor, not Kent, who insists that Astrid scramble her transmission, and it's the Doctor, not Kent, who takes the initiative in escaping from Bennick via the air conditioning ducts. All arguments over Kent, wanting the Doctor to execute Salamander, are absent from the book. Bennick gets a lot more colorful dialogue as he schemes over Faria's arrest. Scenes that Letts implies on TV through scene transitions become exposition in Marter's hands. We learn on page 69 that the action takes place on New Year's Day, and we know now that the TV action was set in 2018, 50 years in the future from the date of air, but in the past, as you and I record this. The back cover blurb, as we heard earlier, sets the action in 2030, or 50 years after Marter submitted the manuscripts to Target. A better look at the operational art of Ian Marter is Chapter 7, which begins with an intense 7-page scene, a very rare thing in the Target line. The Doctor persuades Donald Bruce to join forces with him against Salamander. This is not a single scene on TV. It's 2 scenes, sandwiched around a short scene of Milton Johns being weaselly and oily, which is wonderful in and of itself, but the book works better having this one long scene. Marter punctuates with observational humor, such as the line, as if he, that's Bruce, were reading a description of the fantastic scene out of a book, or giving the Doctor an added moment of impersonating Salamander for Bruce's benefit, which doesn't happen on TV. The rest of Chapter 7 is a 5-page scene where Swan, as on TV, learns of Salamander's deception to the underground community via a stray scrap of newspaper. Although, on TV, Swan is played by the fairly young Christopher Burgess. In the book, he's an old man with a thin gray mustache. Martyr ends Chapter 7 with Salamander threatening Swan. The TV material, I think, is more satisfying. Salamander implores Swan not to go to the surface. In other words, actively trying to save his life. Well, save his life from death at Salamander's own hand, which is what happens, but the alteration makes the book Salamander a little more one-dimensional. Chapter 8 starts with a 3.5-page scene showing Bennick's torture of Jamie and Victoria and the Doctor's rescue. It's a long scene, but not a patch on the 5-minute TV scene made out of the same material, where Bennick is much more sadistic, talking about his enjoyable childhood, and the Doctor spends much more time interrogating his companions while keeping up the Salamander pretense. The TV material is perhaps padding, but when you get Patrick Troughton at his most impish, well, carry on padding, everybody. Carry on padding. Here's some audio from episode 5.
Oh, so they're here, are they? Salamander, I thought you were in Rico. Have they told you anything yet? Not yet. Very well, Bruce and I will take over. You may go, and take your little puppy dog with you, No.
We can't tell you anything.
Oh, of course not. We know everything. We know about Giles Kent. We know about the girl called Astrid. And we know about your friendly doctor.
I don't believe you.
A childish plan to impersonate me. That's the truth, isn't it?
But he didn't agree to it.
You two were sent to the Central European Zone to stir up trouble.
If you want to know the truth, Giles Kent told us a story and we weren't sure. Before the doctor could do anything, we had to come here and find out what person you're like.
Yeah, we found out right enough.
You see, Bruce, they're just terrorists. Not very big fry either. All this nonsense about proof against me.
If you're doing so much good for the world, why are you so afraid for your own life?
Why do you have so many enemies?
Personal guards.
Your own food taster.
And why destroy the one man the people trusted, Alexandra Dennis?
Aye.
Destroy.
One of your men shot him.
Trying to escape?
He shot him deliberately.
Aye, and that girl Faria, well, she was close to Salamander. She'd speak against him, I know she would.
Faria is dead.
Dead?
You've had her murdered too, have you?
Why, you?
Oh, Victoria, don't hit me! You wouldn't hit your old friend the doctor, would you? I wouldn't leave you in the tender mercy of Salamander.
The doctor?
You don't believe me? Oh. Huh. Only you made me leave it in the TARDIS.
While Martyr is busy removing TV material that adds texture and flavor but doesn't advance the plot, he's busy adding violence. Swan's fatal attack by Salamander happens tastefully off-screen late in episode 5. Martyr? Yeah. Ian doesn't really do tasteful. Page 100. Unseen, Salamander had picked up a sharp sliver of flint. "You are taking a terrible risk coming out here like this, my friend," he murmured, raising the crude weapon high over the back of Swan's head. "But I did my best to warn you." Just too late, Swan turned, and the savage blow sliced into his skull, sending him reeling with his hair rapidly filling with blood. His piercing scream echoed through the cavern and the tunnel for several seconds as he fell onto his back, staring up into the azure sky with the hot sun beating relentlessly into his strangely smiling face. Tears welled out of his eyes and ran, mingled with his blood, into streams on the dry ground. Martyr makes one interesting change to the episode 6 material. On TV, Bruce's deputy can be reached by dialing 001, or if you will, 001, on the payphone. In the book, Martyr, paying homage to the plot's source material, changes that to 007. Chapter 9, as is typical of the rest of the book, deletes an awful lot of TV dialogue and small scenes. The guard captain, who gets a lot of lines on TV, virtually absent from the book. Astrid's visit to the underground complex is much less violent, In the book, she's struck on the head and spends most of her scene trying not to faint, whereas on TV, she's always in control and does a lot more work to convince Colin and Mary to trust her. Instead of missing dialogue, Martyr, instead of telling an omnibus edit of the TV serial, adds a lot of five senses language to convey Giles Kent's emotions in episode 6, dusty, torn clothing, throbbing veins in his forehead, sweat, and panic. There's an extra beat in the book that causes Giles to realize that the salamander he's taunting is actually the Doctor, and Bennick and Bruce are able to overhear Giles explaining the entire scheme via a plug-in speaker. That's an invention for the book that allows Bruce to gain the upper hand over Bennick a little more easily. Chapter 10, the climax, sees Salamander shoot Kent in the chest, as opposed to the shoulder on TV, although it's hard biologically to imagine just how Kent is able to survive so long with a, quote, shattered chest. On page 121, Martyr takes even more glee in the body horror of Kent's prolonged demise with dribbling streams of blood, shivering feverishly, engulfed in searing flames, blistering and melting. Oh my goodness. Martyr has even more fun describing the violence with which Salamander is sucked out of the TARDIS into the time vortex and right into a particular Titan Comics adventure in which Salamander makes his surprise reappearance with the 1970s unit crew, although Martyr also removes the reassurance on TV that the rest of Salamander's underground prisoners actually survived the explosion that killed Giles Kent. Where the TV serial ends on a cliffhanger that takes us into Web of Fear, Martyr instead closes with a paragraph promising further adventure and excitement, bottom of page 127. They knew that they were about to materialize yet again in some unknown corner of the universe. Although they did not yet know where it would be, they were certain that it would not be a dull place. And in the end, that was all that really mattered. Enemy of the World is Ian Martyr's fourth novelization. As a two-fisted, globe-trotting action tale which takes us to Hungary and Australia, two rarely seen Doctor Who locales, the book is not quite the equal of the TV serial, although of course nobody reading the book in 1981 would have known that. I think it's got a decent argument at being considered the best of Ian Martyr's first four novelizations, but thankfully we don't need to settle that debate because there are many more Ian Martyr books yet to come. Next time, on Doctor Who Literature, we're going back to the beginning, back to the first event. Join me and one of my very first guests as we travel from Totter's Yard with a couple of unwilling school teachers back to 100,000 BC for a fateful encounter with the tribe of Gum, and of course Doctor Who, and an unearthly child.
A Doctor Who Podcast Network.